I was just curious if you only presented the results of the main theories involving aversion and competitiveness, but while you were at it, did you take any like trait affect measures or other individual difference things that could be interesting to correlate with testosterone or was
You have something in mind?
Well, I was thinking of trait dispositions towards anger, for instance.
Yeah. No. We didn't. No. If you have a particular hypothesis, maybe we can talk about it afterwards. Yeah. Cool.
Well, I have an idea for a trait measure. Have you heard of the PAQ? It's supposed to measure femininity and masculinity. The PAQ, it's supposed to measure masculinity and femininity, and you might be able to use those, but we'll talk about it after. It's it measures masculinity and femininity in a scale form.
In what?
In just a scale, 8 items for each one. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Okay. We don't have that, but yeah, maybe that's interesting. Yeah.
For an audience like this one who cares a lot about the ethnographic data and thinks a lot about the comparative record, I think that the argument that you make about the magnitude of sex differences you'd expect to see in humans is exaggerated. And I understand, I mean, I was, this is exactly what I was asking about in the data that you cited about why you'd expect differences in males and females is the kind of data I think are relevant. But I think that
should have had that slide. Sorry.
the evidence for, so I think that one problem that comes up in evolutionary psychology is a tendency to not use the theory in a nuanced way. So I don't think people are much like baboons or red deer. I think that they fall along the continuum much closer to pair-bonded species. And I think that the evidence from I was just whispering with Brooke here because to see what the ethnographic data were. So in subsistence level societies, I think the difference in reproductive success between men and women is quite modest. I mean, the differences in body size dimorphism is about 10%. And
So yeah, here's. Sorry, I should have just put this in a slide, but here I have.
are they foragers or farmers?
I do not know. I can find the.
So the cougar are foragers,
The young mama are foragers.
So
So anyway, I think that
So there's a
needs to
bias
be-
in the citations I selected.
I don't know. I mean, I was actually going to go look up the ACHE data after this talk because I was
Okay.
curious. I don't know.
But I mean,
numbers,
Warren
but-
Jeffs is not a that's not the EEA.
Okay, so there's
these
a better.
extremes are, well, I just think you need to have a better representation of the ethnographic literature. And so I think, and also I think that the ecology of human reproduction is really quite different, so that children really do need to have fathers around, and that men do have a much larger role in investing in offspring than in some other mammalian species. So I think that the expectation about sex differences ought to be in humans in particular would be more persuasive if it took the ecology of human reproduction and what we know about foraging populations into account in more detail.
So let me just ask you: are you arguing that? So I guess there are two things you might be saying here. One is that we shouldn't be led to expect that the biological theory, the evolutionary theory that I presented at first would apply in humans. Or are you arguing that while it applies in humans, it might apply more so in some societies than others, and that's interesting to look
I
at?
don't think that there's a theory.
Okay.
There's a theory that says that the differences in strategies for males and females should depend on the reproductive options for both sexes. So it's a theory about how these factors, how much males benefit from investing in mating versus parenting, and how much women benefit from investing in mating versus parenting. So the theory is about how those things interact, And I think the case for humans is,
But are you arguing that in humans, in general or on average, there isn't a sex difference in parental investment?
I think it's much, much reduced compared to what you imply.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sympathetic to your point that the details matter, and certainly I think that, you know, this portion of your argument could be bolstered quite a bit, and perhaps some people in this room can help you in that regard in terms of pointing you in the direction of relevant literature.
That would be great.
But I actually disagree with Joan, because I think if you want to say, you know, we're you know, much more like a pair-bonded species and much less like a polygynous mating species, then you have to explain the sex differences in violence in humans, which are, you know,
Well,
enormous.
I would say that they may not be about male mating success in terms of sexual selection, but more about the evolution. I mean, I think that the other thing isn't considered is the role of intergroup conflict in humans and the way that might play out into sex differences in aggressiveness and competitiveness. So it's all done. It's all totally in your argument. It's all about mating competition. But I think in the case of humans, there's reason to think that that there may be a role for other dynamics.
I'm sorry, maybe with violence, what is driving the sex difference in violence other than mating
Well, I think
competition?
that there are two forms of violence in which there are sex differences in human societies. One is in the context of what you're talking about, also in intergroup conflict, that men play a dominant role, a prominent role in intergroup conflict, and we think intergroup conflict may have played an important role in human evolution. I mean, there's at least an argument to be made.
Oh, I see. So you're arguing that males and females have different propensities to say commit murder because males and females historically have played a different role in intergroup
It
conflict.
could be. I just think that there's another, I mean, so that's one response to Dan, but I don't know. I just think that it's, so the characterization, this is all about intrasexual competition for access to mates.
Mhm.
I think that, then I mean, I just think that,
Well, let me ask you then, how would you explain the four pieces of evidence that I provided if in fact, if assuming that we were, you know, completely pair bonded, like gibbons and less like chimpanzees or I forget the other species you mentioned, then why would we have such a strong relationship between various measures of sex hormones?
well, I was
And-
saying that, I mean, one possibility is that the differences in aggressiveness between the sexes is not about intrasexual, well, it's about,
Oh, I
it could
see,
be
I
about
see.
intergroup competition. I mean, I don't know that that's true, but I think that,
I think that's actually just a different version of the same argument, because groups fight with other groups ultimately for the same thing, which is, you know,
but not
resources and women.
necessarily differences between men and women in their group.
But men form coalitions that fight with other male coalitions, and they, you know, typically assimilate the women in the groups that they conquer. They don't
Well-
necessarily go around and kill both the men and the women. They kill the men and the children.
The argument you make for you know, in the data for chimps are that that's not what happens. That what happens is that they expand territory for resident females who then reproduce most successfully.
Well, the ethnographic record is not consistent with that.
I don't know. I think that there are other possibilities, and I would say that there is no puzzle because humans isn't as much difference as you'd expect.
So
Anyway.
one thing about these statistics that made me sort of,
The highlighted stuff?
yeah, well, is
Sorry, it's not a slide.
That's the thing, it's, I think these statistics, and I don't know how these particular studies fit with some of the other ones that are well documented, like the actuary or something, but,
Yeah.
But so you're comparing the ratio of variance to variance, which
Yes.
is, as opposed, I wonder how it would look if you compared the mean.
Oh, the mean's gotta be 1-to-1, cause every child has one mother and one father.
Yeah, but the main number
Yeah,
of
but the
children
mean
is 4.
reproductive success is the same?
It has to be the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Can I ask you a question? So these papers, do they also provide measures of, because it's one thing to measure variance. It's not obvious that variance alone should lead to more intense sexual selection on males if variance is greater in males than it is in females, which is what the effect of polygyny kind of measures. But it's another thing that it's reproductive skew, right? And you explained, I thought clearly, that it's because it's really the skew that's mattering a lot.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily variance. So here it says that it's the female variance and the male variance, but do these papers also provide measures of skew?
So I don't know, I should look at the originals. Whether they do or don't though, skew and variance are going to be highly correlated unless you have a very strange societal structure. Generally, ones with higher variance are going to have ones with higher skew. And I know at least in the animal literature, there's back and forth over which measure is more appropriate, but generally speaking, the two are going to be highly confounded. So.
Do you mean that that's logically true, or do you mean that's empirically true? Because it's not logically true, but it could be empirically true.
I think the reason, the reason why it's empirically usually true is because the reason why tends to be higher variance for males is because males tend to have higher skew. So maybe skew, I would imagine, would be the better measure to take, but given that you don't have skew, variance is probably picking up on skew anyways. So it's a decent measure, but I agree. I think skew would be better. Maybe I should check those original sites. The theory is certainly about skew, even though most of the time they talk about variance.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we need to leave it there.
Okay.